Joined by the leading Conservative backbencher, Jacob Rees Mogg, who of course is on the Brexit side of the argument. John Major not pulling his punches there. He talks about ultra-Brexit opinion boxing the government in with its red lines and narrowing the options for the country when it comes to negotiations. What do you say to that?
He also makes this extraordinary claim that the country is being led against its will in his speech. I can find the exact quotation if you want. He's saying that the deep divisions in our nation are more likely to be healed by a Brexit freely approved by Parliament than a Brexit forced through Parliament at the behest of a minority of convinced opponents of Europe. So he calls 17.4 million people a minority of convinced opponents. 17.4 million is a very important number. We had a democratic vote, the decision has been taken, and what he's trying to do is overturn that. That's the whole point of what he's saying. And his speech is riddled with errors. It says things that are tendentious, bordering on the not factually accurate. So I think we need to look at what he's saying and what his motivation is. And I've got another speech of his. I look back at his speech from 1992. Because bear in mind, John Major, for all his protestations, has been a convinced pro-European.
Though he does say he obviously kept us out of the single currency, for example.
I said despite his protestations, but what does he say here? He says we must stay in the exchange rate mechanism because in his judgment, his very bad judgment as it happens, leaving it would be a betrayal of our future at this moment, and I tell you categorically that is not government policy. Within about 10 days we'd left. He also said that he had already achieved far-reaching reform of the Common Agricultural Policy in 1992. So you have to look at the context of John Major's speeches, the fact that he gets it wrong, he's got it wrong in the past, and he's got it wrong again.
His broad argument today was particularly about the business world, saying that many of them are saying we have to stay in a customs union or a single market, and the Conservative Party, of all parties, he says, should understand business, and when it comes to our economy, that is the way to keep it strong.
That's why I'm going back to this 1992 speech, because that was his argument in 1992. He was saying this is what's in the interests of business. John Major doesn't know what's in the interest of business. He got it wrong then. He followed a policy that destroyed business in the country, ruined families with very high interest rates. He's once again pretending he knows what business wants, and he knows what will make us poorer again. That's what he has been saying.
He also says that what he calls ultra-Brexiteers have been wrong in nearly all that they've said during the referendum campaign. He talks, of course, about the £350 million a week promised to the NHS. He talks about the idea that the EU would have to whistle for its money. We're handing over £40 billion. The idea that a trade deal could be done in an afternoon. There are still things that people were promised and they may not see that they're coming to fruition.
Well, let's look at this. He says Japanese car makers warned that they could close operations in Britain, and he says that on the day that Toyota has announced an investment of £465 million in Derbyshire. So for every tendentious statement made by the Leave campaign, worse statements were made by the Remain campaign. And you would expect John Major, a former Prime Minister, to make a statesman-like speech, free of propaganda and cheap comments. But in fact, it's all cheap comments and propaganda. This isn't a statesman-like speech. This is one of somebody grubbing around in the weeds for weak arguments. And it's a very poor speech in that regard. You can go through it, and indeed I have. And if we had time, I'd happily construe it paragraph by paragraph to show quite how weak and tendentious it is.
What about the idea that in the end, the type of Brexit we have, and you know that this is incredibly contentious, people don't agree about what kind of Brexit we're going for, the Conservative Party isn't agreed on this, the country isn't either. The idea that Parliament, this place that you fought for the sovereignty of it, that's why you wanted to leave partly the European Union, why not say a free vote for MPs?
Did John Major give a free vote on Maastricht? No. I mean, this is where he's really guilty of being a complete humbug.
But he would argue Brexit has far more ramifications in the longer term than the Maastricht Treaty.
No, Maastricht was of fundamental importance. It tied us in to the European superstate. That's what it was about.
We were already in the EU. This is us leaving the European Union.
But Maastricht is a fundamental change of course, of much greater development. It brings in foreign affairs, home affairs, it brings in the social chapter, which had an opt-out, was then opted into. He whipped that through in the most aggressive whipping in modern history. And for that Prime Minister then to say that, oh, it should be a free vote, is either forgetting how he behaved himself, ignoring how he behaved himself, or is straightforward hypocrisy.
So how do we now find the compromises that will inevitably have to be made? He is saying that we will have to compromise if we are to keep our economy strong, because at the moment there is no agreement, even within the cabinet, about what kind of Brexit we have.
Well, this is a further problem with his speech, that every time there's a compromise, he says it's a sellout. So we've agreed to give some money to the European Union, and he says that's a sellout by the Brexiteers. So when it's a compromise he wants, it's a compromise. When it's something the Brexiteers have agreed to give in the interests of getting a good relation with the EU, it's some dishonesty on their part. And I think this shows the fundamental flaw in the approach to his speech. And I heard that last bit that was being broadcast before we came on. He also hasn't got his facts right. That Turkey is in a customs union with the European Union, and that doesn't remove border controls. We had evidence to the Exiting the European Union Select Committee just a couple of weeks ago on exactly this point. So I think he should go back, do his homework, and try and make a statesman-like speech rather than one riddled with errors and humbug.
Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you very much.